If you enjoy this content, please take a moment to rate and review it. Your feedback will greatly impact our ability to reach more people. Thank you. Paul, how you doing, man?
I'm good. It's good to see you.
You too, man. You too. Thanks for sitting in for Vic.
My pleasure.
Yeah, you are. You're now sort of our default go-to man. You're kind of the third man.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it. I have the time to do it. I enjoy the show. I enjoy keeping it up. Forces me to stay relevant and stay focused on what's happening out there. So thanks for inviting me. Glad to be here.
And you got to spend some good time on the course this morning.
Yeah, it was a beautiful day. It's Masters Week.
Yes.
Feels like spring in Nashville.
It feels like spring.
So those are good things. Things are starting to bloom. My allergies a little brutal, but it's a good sign for the spring coming.
Awesome. Well, we don't have a huge show because there just hasn't been that much stuff going on, and I think it's because the world is just trying to sit back and see where are we going
Somebody's
here?
sucking up all the oxygen in the room.
He's a pro at that.
Yeah,
he is a pro at that. I mean, it's actually quite amazing. You have to wonder, in the history of the world, where does this guy rank now in terms of being known by people across the world? He's got to be an all-timer at this point, right?
I've never seen anything like it. I've never read anything like it. Of course, now it's amplified because he's on social media and we're seeing him every day. But just yesterday, like listening to him sign those executive orders, and he's got time to talk about shower head faucets and toilets so that he can wash his beautiful hair. It's like he's something. There's no doubt about it. And whether you like him or not, agree with him or not, his energy level and just intensity is something. And for a guy his age, I just don't know that I ever had that energy. Certainly don't now, but it's impressive from that standpoint. But it's creating some chaos, that's for sure.
I like your objective take on that. I agree. I think you have to find, when people are this impactful, you have to find ways to talk about them that are honest, right? Yeah. And you don't get to be this impactful without having some really strong qualities, right? And I think his energy levels and just kind of consistency and ability to it's so tiring, I think, for us to be on the receiving end of it, but for him to be driving this much change in this kind of period of time.
Yeah, I've never been a part of it as an executive or in a company or on a board level, seen anything like that.
You got to have ice in your veins, right? To move to be this sort of brutal in terms of the kinds of changes we're talking about, right? Yeah. And the implications of those changes. That's some serious ice in the veins, man.
It is. And when you think about it from a business, and he's a businessman, but if you were a leader of a company and just, one day here, the next day here, and people not understanding sort of where you're going and could flip on a dime, it's chaos. And that is challenging, and I don't like that because I've never run a business that way. And if I was an employee in a business, I wouldn't like my leader in it. When the other end of it, he feels a sense that we have to act, and we have to act fast, and I got a short period of time to do it, and we're going to shove these things down and let it play out. And whether that's right or wrong, we'll see.
Right.
But it's certainly not the way that the way I would do it. But
yeah, anyway. One of the things that I talked to Vic about when I returned from a delegation trip that I took in February to Riyadh was just the stark difference of being in a kingdom, right, where the monarch can establish a multi-decade strategic plan and have visibility that this is going to be carried out because there are no elections.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's no democratic thrashing that's going to happen on a every 2-year basis. Like, no, like this is what we're doing, and everyone gets bought in, and then you see the progress, and that's kind of it's a little more like a company, right? Yeah. Where
and if they're benevolent, people can buy into that because they know where we're going, and they can get behind it. And here's my role in getting us there. And it's laid out, and I think people like that structure and order. And
companies are not democracies, no. Right? I mean, it's kind of a benevolent dictatorship, right?
Exactly.
At the end of the day, and he is bringing that model into, and I think he sort of learned something from the first time, that like you kind of gotta go.
Gotta go at light speed.
Yeah, you gotta go at light speed just because you're going to be on the campaign trail next year. This time he'll be on the campaign trail, right? To try to keep the position he's got.
Yeah, and the midterms we'll be honest before we know it. We'll be talking about them.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, so
That's exactly right.
I'm with you. It's an interesting time. The news that you put together yesterday is almost stale today.
I know
on that, but we're going to talk about it.
Yes.
We're going to talk about it anyway because it's interesting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And let's try to always bring it back to like how does this impact us as healthcare leaders?
That's right.
And what are healthcare leaders thinking about all this?
That's right. That's right.
And they should be apolitical, which is what does this mean to me and my business and my company and my investments? And sometimes you just got to put that lens on when we talk about it.
Absolutely. So with that, let's dig in. Yes, as you said, the stories are you can't have a once a week show and expect for your stuff to be relevant anymore. Like we're oscillating too quickly, right? So, but I think the main story this week is that the intensity of tariffs were paused for 90 days, and that pause did immediately result in a stock market sort of spike. Best day since 2001 for Nasdaq, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that was sort of yesterday's story,
right? And
as of today, we're looking up at the banner at the top of the Wall Street Journal online, and we're back to all red with the VIX now back over 40. I think yesterday it had gotten into the mid 20s, but we're right back into the volatility. And I think some of this is probably I'm interested in your take on this, but I think some of this is probably related to the way that it was positioned, that the 90-day break was positioned, and the rest of the world did not corroborate that, right? You know what I mean? It was positioned like this was part of the deal. This was how we were going to negotiate. Look, we've isolated China. We've proven they were really the bad actor. Now the whole world is going to come to the table, do deals with us. And China's now isolated, and now we're going to double down. We're taking 60, going to 125 with them, which is 125 is basically like you can't do business there. You have to get out, right? Because a lot of businesses had factored in 60%. And between some cost cuttings, moving some assembly things, and then probably also some bumping of price, they were like, with all of that, we'll figure it out. 125, people are out, right? People are out. But I just saw, a tweet talking about the European Union is in talks with China about totally removing tariffs on Chinese vehicles, right? So how well choreographed was this entire process, and is the world actually coming to the table to do all the deals that the White House is saying, or not?
Was that just banter in reaction to the markets? So hard to say with him. It's so hard to say. I think at the end of the day, when you think about running an organization or investing in the market, you sort of, once you know what the delta is, you go after it and you figure out, all right, how do we manage through this? When you have a moving target, it's just impossible to manage through that. And I think other countries are feeling that, and investors are feeling that, and the individual companies are feeling that. So to me, it's just we've got to kind of know where we got to stop for a bit and say, right, this is what it is. Let's figure out how to get through it. But yeah, we'll see what happens. I've stopped trying to figure out the market. I learned some valuable lessons way back in the day, which is it's usually easy to figure out like when to sell, but like when to get back in is
yeah.
I made that mistake. I thought I was very smart, and I won't make it again.
The number of people that were talking about buying this dip, I was like, I understand how you could characterize this as a dip, but how do you know this is a dip? Like you'd have to know something about what Donald Trump is going to do tomorrow, and you don't know.
You do not know.
You don't know.
And betting on that, I think that the tariffs. I think the thing is, I thought about all the back and forth, and it's like, all right, what are the big takeaways here? And I think for me, one of the biggest takeaways was like, we are in a war with China now.
Yes.
Like it is on.
Yes.
And we've known it was coming, but it's now official.
It's real.
And that is scary. I mean, it's scary because, wars are ugly.
Yes.
And they will come to an end. Hopefully it's an end where there's a deal, but you don't know that. And they're a formidable opponent. I don't know how we do against them. So it's scary.
Well, they're very formidable, and and some of our behavior makes them more formidable.
Yeah.
Right. You know, it's weird to see them being cast in a position that previously we held in terms of the way that other nations
Right.
are looking at engaging with them and some of the messaging that's coming out of Beijing.
Yeah.
Right. And then, quite frankly, the messaging that's coming out of Washington. Right. The way that we're talking about longstanding allies, you know, the language that we're using. And, you know, and interestingly, it's not that much Donald Trump. It's many of the members of his cabinet. You know, some of the statements and the words they're using are, you know, they're derogatory. They're not the ways that you would speak to your partners. You would speak about your partners in public.
If you were in a joint venture and your lifelong partners, right? You're going to have odds, but at the end of the day, you got to work together,
especially in public.
And in public. Yeah, behind closed doors, you can have a lot of disagreements and arguments, but you don't throw them under the bus in public. You know, with China, I don't know. You know, I mean, their economy has a lot of weaknesses to it, their population growth, but then they have a lot of advantages. They don't have midterm elections coming up in a couple of years, and I don't see them backing down. So, you know, I don't think they. So
they hold a lot of our debt.
Yeah, they hold a lot. There's it's going to be an interesting time, but that to me was the one walk away. It was like I knew it was coming, but you know, last week it's official now.
Yeah,
we are at war. It's an economic war, but it's war.
Yeah, and I guess when you say it that way, this was going to happen at some point.
Yeah. It just happened that was the final straw.
Yeah.
The other piece of it that I'm a little frustrated with, and I'll just speak to my colleagues in healthcare, is I felt like we had an opportunity during COVID. Like we saw the weakness in the supply chain. And we talked about it and we didn't fix it, Marcus. And that I'm frustrated at myself and at others that we had a crisis, a golden opportunity to fix where we got stuff, where we manufacture drugs, key critical supplies to take care of patients. And we didn't really make a dent. I mean, if you look at what we're buying from China today versus pre-COVID, it's not that much different. And it's like, what were we doing these last 3 years? Why didn't we work on that problem? So that's frustrating to me. That was one of my frustration takeaways. And the other one is just, you know, it's going to be ugly with China.
Let's keep moving because I don't want to get stuck on that hook. I don't want to get stuck on that hook that you just like the not fixing it thing.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so then, you know, there was some good news, which is CPI came in at 2.4. I mean, that's a pretty low CPI rating, below what the experts thought. 2.8 was the core. So, you know, we're now, when we're below 2.5, I feel that something is working favorably. And I don't think that this was the number that people necessarily expected. So, like, how did you read this?
Yeah, pleasant surprise. You know, I'm wondering if it's a relevant statistic given the world has, you know, it's backwards looking and it's just a different world today. So is it relevant? Are we going to do anything with it, or is it good to note? I don't know, but it's positive. I mean, certainly if it was going the other direction going into last week, it would have been incredibly concerning.
Here's just a couple of you know, data points relative to it. So used vehicle prices were off 0.7%. Airline fares declined 5.3% in March. Motor vehicle insurance dropped 0.8%. Prescription drugs fell 2%. I mean, you know, when I think about these things, these are all things that I have been more conscious about in my shopping for them across the board. You know, I've changed every insurance provider I've got for home and auto for both myself and for my parents. Just you know, just crazy rate increases that came in year over year, and I was like, we don't have to put up with that. Yeah, we don't need to put up with that. So I wonder if, you know, some of those results are driving, you know, some rationalization into the pricing.
And clearly oil prices are a positive. I mean, that's, you know, paying at the pump. We feel that is real.
Yep.
It affects consumer sentiment quite a bit because once a week you see it, you feel it. It's like you have anger or sadness depending on, or happiness depending on what the prices are, and Americans feel that. So that's positive.
That's right. 6.3% drop on gas.
We'll see. We'll see what it means after everything that's happened with tariffs.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is going to be a really important baseline
Yeah.
for the next 6 months.
Yeah.
Right. We will know how well the tariffs are impacting us based on a 2.4 starting point.
Yeah, and listen, enough on tariffs, but I think it's clearly certain that we're going to have short-term pain, whether we have medium-term relief at all with deals or some onshoring of stuff. Questionable. There's going to be deals to be made. Hopefully that helps. Long term, that's where I'm really curious to see what happens.
Yeah.
Are we able to, and this is a question for me, are we able to onshore the stuff and really make an impact? Is that going to happen at the magnitude we need it to happen in the next year to 2 years?
It's a real question.
That's the question.
It's a real question, right?
I think we all hope that it happens. I don't know that anybody on either side of the aisle says like that's a bad thing if we can start making and producing things in the United States that we're offshoring now. I mean, that's a great thing. I just hope we can do it.
Yeah, and we're going to end as we always do with the AI rundown, and I think that is going to be that plus energy are going to be two very important considerations for all this re-onshoring, right? Because this is not the beginning of the industrial age. It'll be a very different type of model for manufacturing going forward. Related to that, the story in NPR, I just thought I thought it was interesting because this is a very important specific thing for us to track, which is Nvidia as a company. We are quite fortunate in the midst of all of this, sort of economic saber rattling happening between the United States and China, that Nvidia is a United States-based company. Like that is. I don't think people understand like how incredibly fortunate we are to have a company like Nvidia domiciled here. And so this story is about how Jensen Huang went down to Mar-a-Lago after Trump threw a big chip crackdown on Nvidia, and after having dinner in Mar-a-Lago, that was sort of unwound. Now, there's a fair amount of like doing and then unwinding that happens with the Trump administration over the last 80 plus days. This one, I think, is a really important one. And I think this was heralded very well by Silicon Valley investors because they sort of understand this is not a company you want to hamstring, right? This is a company you need to let it run wild across the world, be dominant, be strong, and continue to be the primary chip provider. And oh, by the way, let's make sure that Google is number 2, here in this race. But what was sort of your read on this?
I was interested. It's sort of the second tier chip. Like it's not their best chip, right?
No.
So how important is that? I mean, how big of a difference is that meaningful?
I mean, I think it's symbolic. I think getting access to any of these chips is kind of like an arms race. And so, the second best chip is probably still pretty
good.
Yeah, still pretty important. There's a whole lot of stuff that's happening in the AI space where we're sort of moving out of training because we have sufficient frontier models in place, and we're sort of moving more into inference. And I think this H20 chip is a really, really strong chip for inference. So I think as AI becomes more robust, you need a diverse array of chips to sort of handle the array of different jobs you're trying to deliver on. But I also found it to be pretty symbolic. But in the midst of these 125% tariffs with China, this was rolled back.
And that he is impacted by market dynamics because Nvidia influences the market. I mean, anyone
massively
Mag 7 influences the market. So
Nvidia is driving the Mag 7, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I
agree. So this is I just feel like this dynamic of Jensen and Trump being able to have these discussions and Jensen being able to influence decisions is I consider to be very positive and something we want to continue to watch.
And the Jamie Dimon piece, which we're going to talk about too, right? I mean, it kind of leads into that. I think we were talking earlier that these two have had an interesting relationship in the past, but he was able to get his ear, and I give the president credit that he not only took the meeting and had conversations, but I think listened at least a little bit.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Jamie Dimon is a very, very, very interesting person. He's not so much sort of positioned as a hero, but certainly positioned as a very, very strong wartime leader. He's clearly been battle tested. JP Morgan has come out on top through all of these battles, I would say. I think about the great financial crisis. I think about COVID. I think about even the Signature Bank a Silicon Valley bank, fallout, and in each one of those, I think J.P. Morgan has only gotten stronger in each one of those positions. And when he speaks about America, he's speaking about it from a strong position of institutional knowledge.
Yeah, it's a good letter. I encourage people to read it. I'm not sure that I took away anything that gave me sort of vision into what the future is going to be, but it was he's got some good points in there, and he's pretty disciplined in his principles.
Yeah, I thought, to me, the one thing was that he started, with this section talking about, America and the world are at a critical crossroads. Comprehensive action and leadership are imperative now. It's, it's just, there aren't that many companies in America where their annual letter actually is addressing the nation. And so I found that to be a bit interesting. This is the number one bank, right? I mean, it's kind of like the Fed and then J.P. Morgan, right? What did you sense he was trying to communicate here in this section?
I think he's just constantly trying to remind his shareholders and all of us that the economy and our safety and the strength in the military, they're all intertwined and linked, and you can't have strong any one of them without the other. That's what I walked away with, and I think we all know that, but to have a CEO of a bank remind us of that, I think is interesting.
So I felt that he was trying to lay historical context for what we were facing for people who may not be thinking about this from a how history rhymes perspective. I thought that he was not specifically calling out President Trump, but was certainly saying these are the ideals and this is the position that America holds in the world, and losing this is tantamount to losing America, right? So it's like when you talk about America first, or we're going to be doing so much winning, it's like, what does America even mean? He starts this section talking about only America has the economic, military, and yes, moral power. Right. That's his starting salvo, right? Before he digs in, he goes through talking about, Lincoln, FDR, Eisenhower, et cetera. And then he says, these are 5 things our nation needs to do well in order to secure the future we should want for our country and our companies. I fear that if we fail at one of them, we may fail overall. 1, celebrate American values and virtues with humility in order to restore civic pride, citizenship, and purpose. I think humility was a specific call out. I don't think that was put in there unintentionally. 2, acknowledge and fix our problems at home by regaining common sense and being resolute. 3, recognize that the best strategy for America's success is to implement effective domestic policies that drive robust economic growth for the benefit of all citizens. That seems like an interesting, nod to Trump's focus on the domestic agenda. 4, initiate comprehensive economic foreign policy to win the new global economic war. America will be first, but not if it is alone. Right. That seems pretty clear.
Clearly,
right? And then 5, affirm that our national security and the world's best military, at whatever cost, are paramount and necessary for peace. So, to me, I always feel like Jamie Dimon is one step away from announcing a run for president. You know what I mean? Like he kind of lays out these things, and you could see how this could be sort of the foundation for a presidential, strategic plan.
Yeah, that would be an interesting candidacy. I think he's certainly got the charisma.
No question about that. You know what else he's got? We talked about Donald Trump's energy.
Yeah,
Jamie Dimon's got energy. He matches the energy.
Yeah, it's true.
He matches the energy. All right, so if you got the time, the link will be in the show notes. We think it'll be a good read for you. All right, so moving to the VC rundown, we got one story. This was a quiet week on the VC side. I scrubbed and I tried to find stuff. I looked on Axios. I looked on Fierce Healthcare. Those are kind of the normal 2 where you see those announcements. There's really nothing, but there was the communication that Transcarent has completed their $621 million merger with Accolade, and they eye further investment in AI technology. So this is a totally private transaction here. Glenn Tullman, working with General Catalyst and his 62 Ventures firm, has taken Accolade private. So that's it was a small cap company, and now it's a fully private affair.
Yeah. Well, good. It's a deal. It's a $621 million deal. That's good. I think for me, I like the fact that they're focused on the employer side of healthcare. And I think you've talked a lot about it on the show. You had Stu Clark on with Premise.
Yep.
And to me, it's critical. This is where we invest, right? And so the employers have to step up and be the ones who figure this out. Like we learned that CMMI was not going to do it.
Right.
It's not going to be the government who innovates and figures out ways to drive down costs. It has to be the employers. And I'm not familiar with the companies necessarily, but the focus and the idea of employers are going to own this and drive down costs, because it's just, they quoted 12%. It's double-digit increases every year. And I was actually thinking, and I wanted to ask you, every year, 10%, 12%. We've been going through this forever. It's unsustainable, but yet employers take a very soft approach to this still today on actively managing their costs. And if any other item in the P&L, your supplies were growing that or an other expense, you'd just be all over it and figure out what are we going to do to fix this? But yet it's sort of hands off. And overall, there are companies doing hands off when it comes to managing their employees actively. So I guess what is your take on why that is? Why is it taken, and we're still not there yet?
Yeah.
We're just not actively getting after it.
So I think it's two things. I think one, we really have not had stable ground since COVID. And I think most CEOs,
just as far as employee and talent retention,
recruitment, all of it. Fed funds rate, inflation, everything from overhiring to quiet quitting to now, massive layoffs. It has just not been a stable enough environment for, even though it's a nasty part of the P&L, I would consider it relative to keeping your core business operation functioning, a side quest at the end of the day. Now, not for a healthcare company. If you're a healthcare company, you damn sure have every bit of expertise to dig in there and actually manage this better. You should.
You should. Many who don't, but
that's
you're right. You're right.
You should. But if you're a direct-to-consumer company, or if you're a, whatever, amusement park company, I think it gets really hard. And then I think the second thing is just a continued reliance and dominance of influence of brokers. The brokers, as far as I can tell, they still run the purse. Yeah. They still drive the influence. And I do not see brokers saying it's time for a revolution. I definitely don't see that. I definitely don't see that.
But if you think about our ability to compete, back to our discussion on are we going to be able to make these things in America and onshore things or offshore when the number one cost in a car is healthcare. How are we going to compete? And so it hamstrings us. And so I think we've got to address it, and I think the employers are equipped to do it. And I think there are things that can be done that are not that complicated to be able to do it. And actively manage your employees, deal with people who are high risk and chronic conditions, steer them, back. You've got to, and it's maybe not what you want to do, but you have to find low cost and make sure that your employees are going to low cost providers that may be narrowing networks. I think you've got to incentivize or penalize healthy or unhealthy behaviors, right? And make people who don't want to do the things that they need to do to stay healthy pay more. Right? You can do that. Or you can choose to have a plan where you can go anywhere, but you're going to pay a ton. And we were moving in that direction. It just feels like we've lost momentum. And I think it's actually, not only is it a way to reduce the line item on the P&L, but I think it's good care for your employees if you're actively managing them.
No, look, there's no question about that. I loved Vic's interview with Stu. Stu is he's a passionate guy, and I think you got to be pretty passionate to do the employer health thing, because it takes tirelessness to kind of continue to push. And Premise is doing very well. So that's the good news, is that Premise is doing well. But we've had a lot of smart people in this town, these smart healthcare people try to tackle the employer thing. And Premise, I would consider to be a bit of an outlier in terms of its success, right? And so, related to Transcarent and Accolade, do I think that some of these companies can do well? Yes. Do I think it's sufficient to be a movement that really changes the way that employers are looking at healthcare in America? I think it's more likely employers just say, screw it, I'm going ICHRA. And I think that's more likely than them actually rolling up their sleeves and saying, let's fix this thing because it's fundamentally broken for our employees, broken for our P&L. And if we don't take control of it, it'll be a runaway cost that we'll never be able to get a handle on.
And in some ways that gets to, hey, you're responsible for the payment. If you want to have bad behavior, if you don't want to do the things, you don't want to go to your primary care, then that's up to you. We're going to give you a fixed amount. And
that's right.
That's a piece of it. The challenge with that is you end up, having people that have plans that are basically just, catastrophic plans, and they're not getting healthy. But yeah, we can debate that at another time. But it's going to be interesting to watch. I just feel like at some point there's got to be a tipping point where it becomes a major focus.
I think one other thing I would just point out is that the attitudes around this is kind of cyclical, and it's tied to who's holding power. Is it employer or the labor force? Right. And that kind of goes back and forth. But it feels like between the model that's being set in Washington, D.C. today, right, which I would say is definitely an employer, like standing fully in their power and just saying, employees, you have effectively no power, but you'd be happy you even have a job, right? I mean, that's certainly the message when 25% of HHS is out of a job within the first 100 days. And then you overlay that with sort of the aggressive move back into the office that we're seeing happen across industries. And then the final thing I would say is industries really taking seriously replacing human labor with digital labor, right? And we haven't even gotten into the world of robotics yet.
You don't have to go to primary care.
That's right.
You don't have chronic conditions.
That's right. They just go to the repair shop, right? You know what I mean? So all of those trends to me say the way this ultimately gets solved is the social contract, this century-old social contract. It really started with World War II, right? Where employers are on the hook. It feels like that could just deteriorate. You know what I mean? And that could be the way that this gets dealt with, which is not the same as what we're talking about or what we're advocating for, right?
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's a tangent, but it was just interesting to see the one kind of deal that got done was in that space, which makes me happy because it's been a passion of mine, and it's just the thought of and for the healthcare folks out there, I think we have to do a better job. We should be leading the way.
No question.
Health systems should be leading the way on actively managing their own populations.
And what a dent that would make, because you're the number one employer in the country, right? Like what a dent it would make if our industry actually
did a great job.
Did a great job with
that. And we don't, and we should. And by the way, it also gives you sort of a laboratory for being able to go out, hey, we do it well for our own employees. I always thought that if anybody who went out and said, hey, company, we want to manage all your employees' lives. Well, tell me about how you're doing with your own employees.
That's right.
And if it was a blank stare, that's a problem.
Yeah. All right. Medicare Advantage is getting a rate boost, and Oz was a little coy with this one. It wasn't clear when he came in what he really felt, and he was talking a lot about there's fraud and there's abuse in this space, and we got to get tighter. But it does seem that he is generally an advocate for doctors getting paid. If there is a theme that I feel like I'm starting to tease out from him is doctors should be paid, a proper wage. And so this is definitely a 180 from the direction the Biden administration was taking Medicare Advantage over the course of the last 2 years. Scary outlook for all heavy Medicare Advantage stocks, but all the stocks got a boost on this news.
Their lobbying must be incredible. That's all I have to just say, because I was surprised. I'm like, this is shocking, but I'm not shocked.
Right.
Because I know how strong. So it does signal that they are in favor of privatizing Medicare and not wanting to stint the progress that has been made on moving people towards that population. So that is one. But the other one is to given everything we have going on with cuts and the amount of job cuts, to then turn around and say, well, listen, we're going to give you a 5% increase. That's pretty amazing lobbying to me. And then the flip side, in the same week, you have the news of a focus. We'll get to the story of just the amount of toying and playing with risk adjustment scores to boost it.
Yeah.
So in the same week, we have like
Yes.
polar opposite stories. So I don't. It's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, trying to put together a theme on these shows since Trump has come into office has been very difficult.
It's tough. And if I still, and I've said this for a couple of years, being in that Medicare Advantage space, it's hard to imagine that the target isn't going to be on you for a while, but this signals otherwise.
That's right. All right. So this one was the one that Vic dumped in there, and I read it and I was like, I want to keep this. Because we're going to have some real interesting ethics dilemmas, right? That are going to come down the pipe over the course of the next 4 or 5 years. And to me, this was a sign of one of them. So this is a story from the Wall Street Journal's opinion section. The headline is, "We won't sign an implicit bias pledge. This puts our certification as physicians at risk." So it's written about a code of professionalism that the American Board of Emergency Medicine published in 2021. So 2021, a different time in America, obviously, right? And the code requires to promise to mitigate both implicit or explicit biases based on race, gender, age, on and on and on down the list. And so they cite that they're comfortable signing a pledge to fight bias. So they acknowledge that. But then they say implicit bias, unlike explicit bias, can't be measured. And so they're not going to sign this pledge, and therefore they may not, they won't be recertified, right? Because they won't sign this pledge. And I mean, I have to say that there's one thing to acknowledge that implicit bias exists. And I actually think that the author of this article is not saying that it doesn't exist. I think what they are saying is how do I know when it's present? Because it's implicit. That's kind of the point. And so if I don't necessarily know that it's present, then how can I promise to mitigate it? Consistently. Right. I can't measure it. We're not measuring it today, right? It's not being measured today. Right. So I'm going to sign this pledge, but then, like, what am I actually signing here, right? What am I signing on to?
Signing up for something that I cannot control.
Am I signing up for something?
It's like a double whammy.
That's exactly right. So obviously, we're talking about a code of professionalism that went down in 2021. Yeah. Very, very, very different time in America, but these things are coming back up, right? They're coming back up. They're going to be questioned. And I think this kind of thing actually really, this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, this is an easy win for the authors. And I think it puts a spotlight on the American Board of Emergency Medicine that I'm sure gets some amount of grant money and other things. And quite frankly, like, this opinion piece is going to be a threat to any federal support that they may get, because this is exactly the kind of thing that the Trump administration doesn't want to see anywhere.
Yeah. I don't know much about the pledge. The first time I heard about sort of the issue reading this, working in hospitals for almost 30 years, there is bias.
Okay. Of course.
Patients get different levels of treatment. And I think, the doctors show up and want to do a good job. And there's some real bias that occurs that's implicit, and there's some that's unknown, and there are things that. So I wish they were talking about, like, how do we do a better job taking care of patients? And this isn't the spark, because we know there are issues. We know there are different levels of treatment depending on what your zip code is.
Yep.
And
yep.
in the emergency room, it's a challenge and a problem. And I wish they were talking about that versus a pledge. But I understand the issue, I guess.
Yeah. Vic put it in there, and I know why he did it. For me, I thought what was interesting about this was this wasn't like a DEI thumping piece at the end of the day, but it will have the same effect, right?
It's getting there.
It will have the same effect because it's highlighting, hey, this organization has this pledge
Right.
with these words in there. And you know those words, or those words,
Right.
are those DEI words, right? And I would expect at some point in the coming months, either this pledge gets rewritten, because of this opinion piece, or that there is some negative impact to this organization. That's what I'm expecting coming out.
Yeah,
coming
the
from
pledge
this.
or not the pledge, that's not changing. It's not changing really what the issues are.
That's right.
Which is unfortunate, but I understand. I understand it. Hopefully, they get to the meat of the issue and don't get caught up on wording. I don't know, whether they're going to sign or not. That's not the hill to die on. Hey, listen, I mean, and I hope it's not. The part of me thought, like, none of these guys want to go through board recertification. Like, this is a good excuse to have hospitals drop their requirement for recertifying, because it is, it's a nag for those guys, and they'd love to not do it. And hospitals require it, right? You have to be board certified or board eligible. And if they're saying, "Oh, whoops, we can't do it because of this," no, I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, see that's the realist right there.
Me.
Well, no, the realist, the experienced hospital operator there saying, I know these folks. Yeah. So I wanted to include this for two reasons. One, I'll start with that, and then we'll dig into the actual meat of this. But Manat has started this newsletter called the 80 Million, where they're talking about Medicaid, and I think it's fantastic. Every week, just really good analysis, but it's not like a website. It's a newsletter. So we're going to include a link to this specific piece, but I encourage our listeners to subscribe to this, because every week I'm reading it, and I feel like I'm getting deep insight into what's actually sort of happening on the House and Senate floor, and also what's happening in the halls of the regulatory bodies when it comes to Medicaid. So anyway, I just wanted to give them a shout out for what I think is really good work so far. And then let's talk about Speaker Johnson and him pushing through the resolution unamended, and so we don't have any Medicaid spending cuts yet to discuss.
As I talk to my friends in the industry, everybody's nervous, incredibly nervous, particularly about supplemental programs that have to get sort of reapproved, and they're nervous that, one, they're going to take forever to get approved because we're sort of in a state of limbo.
Yep.
And that's great if it gets approved and it's retroactive, but nobody.
But in the meantime,
particularly the public sector, and it's cash.
Yeah,
I mean, it's cash.
There's cash on hand. In the meantime,
it is cash. They're holding your cash.
That's right.
And it creates uncertainty in the markets. Nobody likes explaining it to their stakeholders that we didn't get it this quarter, but we're going to get it 3 quarters from now. And there's a lot of uncertainty on what's going to happen with them. So it's a positive sign. I still don't feel good about, these supplemental plans, payment plans, whether it's DISH or the DPPs. I feel like they got to get.
So, Paul, as a very experienced hospital operator, can you help us understand, other than the money was there, so of course we're going to take it. Can you give a little bit of background onto how we landed in this place with this supplemental payment model that I think when you communicate it to someone who's not invested in receiving those payments, they kind of look at it and they go, that looks a little wonky, right? You know what I mean? The way the money's flowing, and
we're gonna get it here. We're gonna send cash up to the government. They're gonna match it plus, send it back to us. It's gonna be based on some formula that nobody understands. Yeah, I get it, and it's tricky. So the intent originally, when you think about, let's just take disproportionate share, what we call DISH. The intent was to say, okay, we're gonna pay everybody sort of a fee-for-service Medicaid, and we know it's not enough. Then we're going to look at the hospitals who have a disproportionate share of uninsured, underinsured, and we're going to try to make up the gap.
Right.
Okay. That was sort of the intent. There are lots of other programs and other ways where similar type programs got put in place to do the exact same thing. DISH got whacked at one point, and hospitals went and said, hey, we basically are taking care of these Medicaid patients, and we're losing money on every patient. We can't continue this. We're going to have to cut services. So, okay, there's other ways, other programs we can do. And so they came up with the waiver programs and other programs. Same thing. We find dollars here that we match. We send up, they match it and send it back to us. And the goal is to take care of more Medicaid patients. So make it a little easier and to try to get to break even on Medicaid. Okay. Then you had all these states who didn't expand. And basically, this was their way. They weren't expanding Medicaid. So it's like, all right, we're not expanding. We're going to continue to take advantage of these programs and send our money up and get it matched.
Yeah.
And that's the way we're going to sort of deal with Medicaid versus expanding Medicaid.
Yep.
Tennessee, Texas being all those. So,
Yep.
At the end of the day, I wish it was simpler because it is so complex, like how it gets matched, the formulas for who gets it and how it gets distributed when it comes back. It's so complex. It takes external consultants, so you pay millions of dollars to help you through these programs, which is waste, in my opinion. So
which makes it easily assailable politically in a moment like this, right?
It does.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the scary thing.
Yeah. The first time I looked at it, we had a program in Florida, and you're just like, what? Like, are you kidding me? But I think the health systems are taking advantage of legal actions and legal programs and trying to maximize their reimbursement. And quite frankly, without it, I mean, it's just impossible to take care of these Medicaid patients and do it at that kind of a loss.
Well, so that was kind of my. It gets right back to the whole M&A thing, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit, right? Which is, okay, I get that you may not like it. You may think X, Y, Z, blah, 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 blah. Play it all the way out, right? Play it all the way out. What's going to happen? For-profits are just going to turn people away, right? They're just going to not take care of those patients because they don't have to, right? They don't really have.
They got to see them through the ER, but that's the extent.
But that's it.
Yeah.
That's it, right? So crash and burn through the ER, and then we sort of manage our losses there, and then all the nonprofits where this is their payer mix, like the payer mix is this population. I mean, how much scale do they need to make it work? I mean, we saw coming out of COVID, Common Spirit. We saw Ascension. They just finally crawled out of these multi-billion-dollar holes in the ground. They've done it. They've gotten out. But if you take away these supplemental payments, they won't stay out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, correct. And I don't see a world where they're taking them away, but they can be shifted and reduced, which is unfortunate, but probably likely. And then, you talk about, not extending subsidies on the exchanges. That has an impact as well. That's a negative impact. We'll see about that. It'd probably be one or the two. I don't think it'll be both.
Yeah.
But one of the two is likely to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit of both.
When do you think, with this whole kicking the can situation, when do you think that lands?
I think it's got to be within we're
Q2?
We're supposed to have a budget by Memorial Day, right? So I think we'll have some certainty by then. The deadline for the subsidies on the exchanges is, I think this, I'm not sure about that, the spring or the fall. It's coming up, and Congress has to act to actually renew the subsidies.
Yeah.
So otherwise, you have tons of people who were able to get on the exchange and have subsidies who won't be able to afford that today. And so basically, they will be uninsured. Okay. And then for hospitals, what does that mean? Well, that means you're chasing them down when they show up in the emergency department and you're not getting any money for them. They're basically uncompensated care.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to watch. Is this positive? Yes. I don't think many in the industry are overly optimistic that they're going to come through totally unscathed.
Mm-hmm. Agree. All right. So one acquisition here on the payer side, small, but CareSource acquires Commonwealth Care Alliance for $400 million. Had you heard of
I have never had any interest. I've heard of the names, but I've never had any interactions, no contracts with these two. It sounds like they're sort of California, Northeast. Yeah. But I take it as, listen, you sort of had a failing concern here, and they were able to merge with somebody who's got a chance, so it's positive.
Yep.
You know much about them?
No. I mean, it was a deal, so I wanted to track it, and especially with you being here, maybe you had some context.
I don't have any inside baseball, other than it's good to see a deal get done that otherwise this company would have probably gone out of business, right?
That's right.
So.
That's right. All right. So back to the Medicare Advantage stuff. Plans reaped $33 billion extra from coding intensity. So this is kind of digging into, what is actually underneath some of the investigations that people are calling for. Specifically with the biggest Medicare Advantage plans.
See, I mean, this doesn't bother me because you sort of understand it, right? I mean, they're playing within the rules.
Yep.
If you align incentives and say, we are going to incentivize you right up front, if you have sicker patients and you're able to document that you have sicker patients, higher risk patients, we're going to pay you more for those patients. Insurance companies tell the primary cares, hey, if you have sicker patient panels, we're going to pay you more for that.
Yep.
Doesn't sound wrong. And it shouldn't be surprising that they're going to find that they have sicker patients than fee for service,
That's
right?
right.
Who
That's
has really no incentives. And you could do everything perfectly. And of course, if you're incentivized to document incredibly well so that you can get paid for your intensity versus somebody else is like, yeah, we have intense patients, but it doesn't really matter. We're going to get paid the same.
That's right.
Now, are there bad actors? Of course.
Of course.
Right. But overall, it's not surprising that you have a population that you find have higher intensity and they're doing a better job. There are companies who make their living off of helping insurance companies and providers document the intensity of their patients. Why? Because if we can document them correctly, which is a good thing.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
We're going to get paid more. Whether that's the right end game with this program, but it does seem interesting that you have this and this intensity and scrutiny. On the other end, they're getting a 5% increase. So,
yeah.
What's your take?
Well, my take is that there was a window of time where every time Vic and I would sit down, he'd have another PBM story, and it was clear somebody was paying for the PBM stuffs. And then there was the private equity window. Yeah. Every week there's a private equity story, and I was like, someone's paying for the private equity stuff. Someone's paying for these Medicare Advantage stories. Every week, one of these stories sort of pops up, and it's fun to track news cycles because you start to realize like that's what's happening. There's someone is using the media for an agenda that they have that they want to get out there, and they can just get a drumbeat of stories, and it usually goes for about 3 months. That's kind of that's my take on it.
If we found systemic abuse and overcoding or improper risk adjustment scores or game playing, I think that needs to be cracked down on.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of that, but it's not surprising you incentivize a behavior and that behavior happens, and then you say, well, why'd you do that? Well, of course, you told me to do it.
That's right. And that seems to be a pretty common theme in healthcare, right?
Yeah. Well, now there are bad actors out there, whether they're primary care groups or pockets of insurance companies. I don't know anybody who's doing anything bad systemically, but I'm sure it's out there.
Yep. All right. So you found this story, Modern Healthcare, CVS, Express Scripts, Optum warm up to biosimilars. So what about this stuck out to you? And then we'll kind of dig in.
I think from a overly positive standpoint, if you think about what's happened with autoimmune diseases over the past 10 years, it's pretty impressive with just the amount of drugs and biosimilars and the amount of options these patients have. That's it's great. So, if you thought of somebody with Crohn's or colitis or some other autoimmune disease, there was like one drug.
That's right.
And not surprisingly, that drug was ridiculously expensive because it was the only drug on the market.
Oh, yeah.
Medicaid, right?
Yeah. And, I mean, how much money has Humira made?
Humira is the other one, right? So it's incredibly positive that we've had advances, and now the trick is going to be like, there's so many of them, like how do they work together, what's the sequencing? That's the Wild West, right? But it is very positive that we have competition, we have choices, because a lot of times these drugs work for patients and then they stop working.
Yeah.
And what happens when they stop working? Well, now you have other drugs you can go to. So all amazing. What was kind of just shocking is like, it would seem if you ask anybody, like, would this be a good thing for the people who buy these drugs?
Right.
And so you're paying, and the PBMs are sort of doing the opposite, which is,
yeah.
Hey, we have these rebate deals with the legacy sort of drugs, the Remicades of the world, and we're not going to move to these lower cost drugs. So that was kind of weird. I think it's just something to watch. Kind of not a good look for the PBMs.
No.
Another not a good look for the PBMs. It's just we got to fix the incentives there, and we've got to get us focused on, listen, we have the opportunity to buy cheaper drugs. We need to do it for all the right reasons.
So play it out for a second. What's the counter step that the big pharma brands take once this move happens, right? Okay, so biosimilars get equal presentation, equal footing, which obviously is going to take a huge percentage of the share from the big brands.
I think the counter is, hey, we have longstanding relationships with you. Okay, you buy other drugs from us. This is part of our bigger deal with rebates and such on compliance. And so the PBMs are incentivized to continue to work with the large manufacturers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they're getting dollars back in other ways versus just sort of on that particular drug.
That's it. That's
not
it.
good.
Yeah.
The other thing I thought about just in this is it'll be interesting, that I've thought sort of the infusion businesses, the IVXs of the world, we know the folks there.
Yeah.
Great, right? It's great for patients.
Yes.
There's also everything's moving to self-administered, and what's going to happen?
Yes.
That's going to be an interesting shift.
Yes.
As a lot of these infusions that were done in hospitals and outpatients, they're gonna be done at home.
Right. Yeah.
It's just a matter of time.
Like is the infusion business a transitional business?
It seems that there's going to be a pretty massive shift over the next 5 to 7 years.
Yeah. Agree. All right. So Cuff and Hall came out with their Q1 2025 M&A quarterly activity report for health systems. Activity was down in a pretty significant clip. And so, some of that could just be, hey, we're going to wait and see. We have a big, new administration in place and we don't want to do deals while we're trying to figure out what that looks like. But the Q1 announced transactions year by year, going back to 2018, there were 30. Even last year, there were 20 in Q1, and this year, 5. So, really sort of falling off a cliff from historical norms.
Yeah. You would have thought that, sort of coming out of COVID, you would have seen a ton of deals. We had sort of an unfriendly, with the Lena Khan and the FTC, just really making it unfriendly, either block deals or people just hesitant to do deals because they weren't going to put up the fight.
Yeah.
It's like, let's not even try.
That's right. That's right.
The market share argument is just not going to go anywhere.
Yep. We saw HCA do that when the Utah deal. They said, you know what? Okay,
we're out.
We're out.
It happened with CHS and Novant there. It's just kind of silly stuff. You're like, this is good. And if these deals don't get done, hospitals and close, they still didn't happen. So you would expect that would have popped with new administration. I think you're dealing with all the uncertainty stuff.
Yeah.
Until we have some certainty, it's going to be
hard
to do deals.
It's hard.
But I think get some certainty on the economy, on tariffs, assurances the deals can get done with the new administration, and I think you have to see deals happen. I am a believer that in order for hospitals and health systems to survive, they have to continue to gain scale, regional scale, and to somewhat national scale. They have to be relevant with payers. They have to be able to share systems, share doctors. I just don't see onesies and twosies being able to make it.
Yep.
I've never thought they were going to be in a position of power, and I just think it's getting harder and harder every year that goes by. So I would hope that we see deals getting done in the latter half of the year going into next year. I'd be surprised because they need to get done.
Yeah,
they really don't.
I agree.
You think?
Look, every time Vic and I have this conversation, I'm always like, the alternative is going to be these things go out of business, and then the state's got to come in and take care of their people, so then they start running a health system. You know what I mean? Like that. That's, you got to play this stuff all the way out, right? You cannot have communities around the country not having access to care. You can't do it. And going back to the whole supplemental payments thing, that is inevitably going to happen in some form. That is going to drive a need for more scale. A stronger balance sheet, more scale, more centralized operational capacity. And hub and spoke model.
Yeah, and I've done a bunch of these, and I've seen a bunch, and you don't always. You may have some price increases, and sure, you may have some more leverage with the payers and get some better rates. But the alternative is you don't have a health system, you don't have a hospital, right? And so it's like, and by the way, for those communities, they're not feeling that, right? I mean, most right. So for them, it's like, are you really going to deny us and risk our hospital closing for a potential price increase when, we're not paying for it anyway?
Right. Right.
So I don't like the one that really the CHS Novant one, when I'm like, these hospitals are struggling. Like, if CHS, they can't make it work, they're gonna close if something doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Are you telling me you're not, what's the worst case scenario? Prices probably would go down because actually the charge master might go down, but rates aren't going up, and there's not that much commercial business in these small communities, these rural communities. So it's like, and governmental is fixed. So it's crazy to risk a hospital closing for a potential anti-competitive situation that might happen.
we could not agree more on this.
Yeah.
Solidly on the same side of
Bottom
the
line
table.
is let's hope this chart looks better in a couple, because I think it needs to happen.
Yeah. But you know, there are some really interesting shared principles between the last FTC chair and this FTC chair that we're going to have to see play out as this FTC chair starts making more statements.
Yeah.
I'm hoping a hard stance against health system transactions is not one of them. It's not thoughtful.
Yeah,
it's not thoughtful.
That'll be interesting to see, and see a couple that actually come forward that may not have gotten approved under the last administration. See what happens with this one.
AI rundown time. So Wall Street Journal opinion section. Mark Benioff he has been steadily communicating in every form that he can that AI is going to impact the labor force. He's not hiding from that. He's made it very clear that Salesforce is kind of on a hiring freeze when it comes to software developers, right? Because I think we all now can recognize the power of these LLMs when it comes to writing code, at least at the level of a junior or even sort of emerging mid-level developer. Maybe not sort of a power of 10 developer, but a lot of the workforce can be replaced today by the code capabilities of Claude Sonnet right now. So this is him sort of saying, say hello to your new colleague, the AI agent. Today's CEOs are the final generation of executives who will lead exclusively human workforces. And I think that is that's a concept that so many people have not internalized. And at the same time, there are companies like Nvidia, like Salesforce, that actively have a digital workforce in place today. Like they're agents that are actually tasked and monitored and doing things and working in collaboration with humans, right? So the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. This is probably exhibit A of that in the AI world.
And the tech companies, it makes sense, but what's kind of hits you here is that it's not just the tech companies, it's the CEOs of the future of any kind of company.
Healthcare especially
are going to have a paradigm shift, because they're no longer going to have exclusively human workforces too. So
no, we at the summit last week, we're still waiting for all the production files, but it was great. And Tarun Kapoor, who is the Chief Digital Transformation Officer of Virtua Health, he was in dialogue with our buddy Nick Holland, who runs AI at HubSpot. And Tarun has done a lot of real world, shipping AI out into the world. And Tarun's position is he's a doctor, and his position is, listen, there's no question we're going to have a shortage of docs. No question, right? No question about that. On top of that, medical knowledge is doubling every 6 months. So the recertification process, at a minimum, a doctor is going to have to be assisted by AI. At a minimum, otherwise, you're going, if you make it entirely human, then the docs will fall behind the advances of medical knowledge, just because they can't track the progress, right? And so that will necessitate not just AI scribes that are supporting documentation processes, but actual clinical support, actual decision support, actual participation of an AI workforce in the delivery, not the documentation in the delivery of healthcare.
Yeah. Supplanting physicians who are not there. And I think the clinical workforce knows that. My sense is they know that, and I don't think they're that threatened by it, because they know that they're not going to be out of a job. I mean,
they're burned out already. They already know.
And hopefully it'll make their job easier. So my sense is they're aware that's coming, and yes, it's going to be scary getting there. But I think just this next generation of doctors is going to help with that as well. So it'll be exciting to see happen. I mean, I think it will happen. It'll be effective, and we're going to stub our foot for sure, stub our toe for sure. But it's exciting, and it's got to happen. We're there now. I mean, there are pockets where health systems are dealing with it right now, whether it's pathology, radiology. They're dealing with real life shortages that are impacting clinical care and their pocketbooks.
That's right. Yeah. So. And look, to me, the reason why I love starting our shows with the economy and then ending them with AI is just because, when we talk about the economy, to me, it's a lot of talking about the disintermediation of the world that we knew. right? You know, what feels like seemingly endless chaos to the world that we knew. And when we look at AI, it's the world that we're entering. We're not quite there yet, but it's the world we're entering. And it is the X factor in this transition. You know, when we talk about trade wars and the reshifting of you know, power in the world, none of that will happen independent of AI. Like, AI will be a driving force in whatever the result of this transition that we're in lands, you know, wherever we actually arrive at.
Yeah.
This was a big week for Google. So it was Google Next. This is their annual big developer event. For, I would say, the last probably 5 years, it had been a lot about Google Cloud. It is now all about Google AI at this point. So we've put several links in the show notes here from Tech Radar. They did a really good job documenting it. The first link that we've added is kind of like a full rundown of the entire event. So we won't talk about that one, but I did pull out a couple of stories here. One, Sundar Pichai, who's Google CEO, basically doubled down on the R&D spending. So $75 billion cloud and AI spending spree. You know, every time Vic and I talk about AI stuff, all the numbers are the billions. Like, you can't even have a discussion about it without saying you're spending in the billions. And it's regularly 20 billion or more. So 75 billion, that I just have to say that is a notable number. When we look at the funding rounds of OpenAI and Claude Anthropic recently, 75 billion that's a serious number.
So you follow the money there as an investor. Where do you start thinking about? I mean,
well, I think what it says to me is all of the big tech companies have come to the complete conclusion. Like, so I kind of think about like Polymarket, right? Yeah. You know what I mean? Polymarket is people, it's polls, but with money on the line.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I view this kind of like a form of Polymarket. Do these big tech people think AI is absolutely the future and it is going to eat industries as it totally removes cost of labor? They're all 100% bought in on it. 100% bought in. So they don't care about getting knocked on a quarter-over-quarter basis for these investments in R&D by Wall Street. They don't care. They're all going to do it because they've all seen what I think a lot of us haven't yet seen. They have seen that this is going to radically change P&Ls. Radically change P&Ls. And quite frankly, they will consolidate even more power than they have today, right? Clouds will become factories. Clouds will become universities. You know what I mean?
It's hard to wrap my brain around that, but I get it.
Does that make sense though?
It does.
Just
it does.
analogy-wise?
And I don't disagree with it. I don't know how quickly it happens, and I guess that's the debate is the when. But I can wrap my brain around that it's going to happen.
Yeah. It's a phenomenal shift.
I'm an old school guy, but I don't disagree.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal shift that we're in. I wanted to highlight that there's a couple of other big stories. You know, like Google released a new TPU chip, and you know, some other things like that. Obviously, Gemini's got some things, but I wanted to talk about how they unveiled their new security AI agents, mostly because you know, security is a massive issue in the era of AI. But also, it highlights their recent acquisition, right? You know, so they just spent a lot of money on the Israeli security company Wix. What did they end up at? Like 36 billion or something like that. It was a ridiculous amount of money, a huge acquisition. And it was a security acquisition. And Google has never really been known as a security company. Obviously, a very secure company, but they've never branded. That's exactly right. They've never proactively sold it. And they need their own, you know, in the world of enterprise cloud, you know, you got Amazon and Microsoft. Google's a distant third, quite frankly, from, you know, against those two. I think security is a really interesting place for them to focus on differentiation, especially in the era where AI and cybersecurity and quantum chips are all sort of, you know, making everybody very, very nervous. It's a really smart differentiation point for them. I think that big acquisition helped prove to the market they're serious about being in the game here. And so I expect to see more and more Google focusing on security-specific AI agents. One last little thing from Google, they created something called Agent Space. So this is their next foray into enterprise search that is more LLM enabled. So many small, medium-sized businesses and probably a growing number of enterprises run on Google Workplace, meaning Google Docs, Gmail, Google Calendar, that whole kind of suite. And so you start building all this institutional knowledge across all those apps that you're using. And imagine now having an LLM that has enterprise-level security and can start to leverage that as its core training base of data.
That's exciting. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I thought about this. If you were out there right now and you were going to kind of start from scratch, sort of using one of these for email, for communication, for security, for VPN, for an AI agent, like which one would you go to? Like
Google.
what's Google?
Google.
Okay, you're
Google.
because I'm still kind of figuring it out. And I use Outlook, and it's just it's super clunky.
It's clunky. Yeah. No. I mean, the reality is Microsoft continues to rely on its incredible distribution and its brand, its impenetrable brand in the enterprise. I'm not a corporate guy, right?
Yeah.
So that means absolutely nothing to me. And so I look at user friendliness,
right, which is where I am. Yeah.
Right, efficiency, feature set, like integrations, APIs, all that kind of stuff. And to me, Google beats everybody on that. Like it's actually not even close.
Just ease of use.
Yes, they were just late to the party on cloud.
Yeah.
That's where they have to make up ground. They were very late to they were late to the party on AI, and they invented the damn thing.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they're just slow out of the gate. Yeah, they're slow out of the gate with this stuff. But yeah, if I'm gonna start with something, it's gonna be Google for sure.
For me, it would take work just because I had so much in the Microsoft cloud,
of course,
just and OneNote and all that stuff. But so it's like it's momentum. But I think you're right. It's time to make the shift.
Well, I think your question was the right one, which is if you're starting today.
Yeah.
Like this is the thing. Microsoft can keep you.
Yeah.
Because
you have all your stuff.
Because you have all your stuff there,
and
right?
You're used to it, and you're used to the look and feel.
Okay. Last story. You just said the timing, right? More and more we are seeing people that are starting to forecast when we're going to get to AGI, superhuman AI, whatever, right? But understanding that it's something it is actually important to try to think through, because at the point when it happens, the world will fundamentally change, and it will be like a light switch. It'll be like we were in the dark, and then we're in the light, and things are radically different at that point. Now, we've had these moments, but humans, we're not that good at the pattern recognition of them because we need narrative, and we don't like this level of change. We've just talked about, the Trump first 100 days and how everything is shut down, and we see it as highly volatile. So no deals, no investing, no value going up, no capital flows, et cetera. I view at this point, the inevitable coming of AGI or superhuman AI to be one of those things that, generally speaking, humans are going to keep their head in the sand on, because for each one of us individually, it presents a truly existential crisis that we can't quite deal with. Like, what happens when the AI is better than me at everything, right? So this is the AI-2027.com is it's a blog that's sort of pulling together different thoughts around when we're going to get there. And Dario Amodei, who is the CEO of Anthropic, said 2027. Yeah. More and more people are starting to converge on 2027 as like this is kind of when we're likely to get there. Now, there's a huge difference between having this capability and then this capability actually being deployable in a way that we can economically benefit from,
and being adopted,
adopt, right? Yeah. So there's a huge difference between those two things. But what I worry about is we already have hyper consolidated our market into 7 companies. Those 7 companies are saying, quarterly earnings be damned. I'm investing. I'm all in. I'm putting all chips in on this, right? So the rest of the world is like taking a wait and see approach.
Right. And
the Mag 7 is all in on this, right? And the timeline is 2027. This is the emerging consensus timeline is 2027. how much further are we going to go into the consolidation of power of big tech? And it's getting close to sort of like a chattel society.
You're right.
It really, I hate to say it, but like it's getting really close to that.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't follow it nearly as closely, but I just from my perspective, from my seat, I don't argue with that time frame. It makes sense to me. It's scary. I mean, I'm scared of it, but it's exciting and scary at the same time. Now, to me, it feels like sort of we really get the average company, the healthcare company, sort of has decent, solid adoption where they're showing ROI. Their users feel good about the applications. They're sort of across the board, not just in pockets. That feels more like 3 to 4 years, but I mean, still, either way, we're talking right around the corner.
That's right.
I mean, whether it's 2 years or 4 years, it's right there.
It's right there.
Yeah.
It's right there. So anyway, this is largely a link. Part of what we try to do here is make sure we're providing sources for everyone to kind of like dig in on their own independent study and dig into this stuff. And this was one that kind of stuck out to us as something we should pass along.
Yeah, it's good.
Paul.
Hey, it's been fun.
We made it.
Thank you. Yeah, we made it. We made it through.
We thought it was going to be 45 minutes. You didn't know, man. You didn't know I could drag this into I can drag this to 115 anytime, man.
Well,
even with a short list of stories.
We went on a few tangents, but they were worthwhile because there wasn't as much news as normal. So listen, I hope we get some normalcy. It's like going to the amusement park. It's good for a day. It's fun. The roller coaster is great, but like 3 days in a row, you start to feel a little queasy. So. I could go for some normalcy soon.
I don't want to live in the amusement park, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you like to go there and visit for a couple of days. But I don't know. At my age, 3 days, that's like, with my kids, I'm ready to go home. But listen, I hope things do normalize. And I appreciate you and Vic for the show. I think it's good. I think it forces us all to think about what's happening. And for me, co-hosting, it forces me to sort of, look at all this stuff and digest it and say like, all right, what does it mean? So I appreciate being invited and we'll do it anytime. Man, we're lucky to have such a thoughtful, experienced person like you be willing to share, your time and do the study to actually come on the show and be ready. So Paul, anytime, man, thank you so much. Thank you.